Hey, welcome everybody. If you're just joining us here, this is our live stream tonight with Cool Bike Projects. My name is Rusty Earl, and this is my channel called Cool Bike Projects. And tonight we are super excited to welcome with us Mark Rainey, who is with Groody Brothers Bicycles in Topeka, Kansas. I had the privilege of working with him about 2 months ago, 3 months ago, working on a little documentary about his business and the work that he does. And I think you'll be really surprised at how much this guy knows about working on bikes. So before I introduce him, I want to go and show you a short video that is taken from the documentary we did. And this is from about 2 months ago. So we'll watch about a minute of this, and then I'll have Mark come on and join us.
We do get a lot of sentimental bikes, and they want to preserve it for their grandkids. We get a lot of bikes that this was my dad's when he was a kid, or this was my bike that I rode all through college. This was my brother's bike and he passed away. Just a lot of different attachments. The feedback we get from people is tremendous. It's very gratifying to hear from them. Recent bike, a fellow said, "It's too pretty to ride now." It was his daily rider, and now he's afraid to ride it because it looks so great. I had one guy come to the shop, pick it up, and he goes, "You must get an awful lot of satisfaction out of doing this." And that caught me. It's like, well, yeah, I do get personal satisfaction out of taking something that was less than stellar and turning it into something.
Awesome. So first of all, let's go and welcome Mark here. Mark is joining us all the way from Topeka, Kansas. How's it going, Mark?
It's going very well. Thank you, Rusty.
Awesome. Hey, thank you so much for spending your time with us this evening. We got a fun Q&A to go through some questions with Mark here, but just to give him kind of a shout out, if you've never heard of Groody Brothers Bicycles or Bicycle Restoration, you need to check out his channel. I'm gonna pull up my little cheesy graphics here. Sweet, there's the website down below. But for anyone that has ever worked on a classic bike, a mountain bike from the 90s, dad's bikes, road bikes, really odd and hard to find parts, Mark is your guy. He has been doing bike repairs for 20 plus, 30 plus years. Does that sound right, Mark?
20
plus years. And I had the pleasure of going and visiting him in his shop a couple months back. And what you're seeing is just a tiny assortment. And I mean just the tiny assortment of the tools he has in his shop. So having said that, Mark, why don't you tell us a little about yourself and about your business?
Well, by trade, I was always a printer, but always worked a part-time job, and eventually I got into bikes and took a part-time job at a bike shop, and I was in heaven there. So, but my brother and I were both into cycling, and the family business was a steel fabrication company, and they had a powder coat line. So we had the ability to take a bike that had seen better days and make it look pristine and brand new.
Awesome. Awesome.
Kind of start out.
When we did part of your documentary, I know you talked about having your own, bikes as a child. And I think a lot of us have memories of those first bikes that you had. You were telling me earlier tonight there was one of your first bikes you restored or one of the first bikes you owned. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, the official first Groody brother bike here in I was in Kansas City prior to Topeka, and there was the Critical Mass ride, which is I think it's the last Friday of every month, and just largely a bunch of hooligans get together and ride through the streets of the city promoting allegedly the cycling. But it was just a good time, and out being visible, making bikes aware to the community. And at that time, fixies were all the rage. And I thought I wanted to try a fixie. The shop I was working at dealt in used bikes. And sometimes they would take them in trade for new bikes. And some of them just weren't all that great when they came in, and he'd give them a few bucks for it. And one particular old Trek was getting thrown out. They scrapped parts off of it. And I decided to save it from the dumpster and brought it down to the steel fabrication shop and started working on it. And basically stripped it all down, made some refinements to the frame, took off all the unnecessary braze-ons, and powder coated it gloss black, and did it up in a real nice kind of vintage Shimano 600 fixed gear, and mustache bars and the whole bit. And it turned out really nice, in my opinion. I wish I still had it, but it got a lot of attention on the critical mass rides, and people, oh, you did that yourself? Yeah. Can you do mine? Can you do mine? My brother and I kind of look at each other and say, well, yeah, we could. Shop's available on Fridays and weekends. So that's kind of where it all began.
That's awesome. So this wasn't like an instantaneous overnight business. This was building up for a couple of years.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Awesome.
We,
Awesome.
started pretty humble.
Oh, good.
We go back as far as the first bikes were, I guess if you want to say advertised, they were advertised on MySpace. If anybody in your audience still knows what that is.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm getting a reminder before I forget. I've been having a lot of people ask me over the last 2 months how they can help support the channel and live streams. So no pressure on this whatsoever. But if any of you are interested in helping to support the live streams, what we're hoping to do is about once a month, bring on a different guest, whether that's someone that restores bicycles, builds them, hand welds bikes, whatever. And so no pressure. But if you're interested in making a donation, the blue little QR code goes to my official Venmo business account. So if you want to put in $1 or $2, I will make sure Mark gets a root beer or something from this whole thing. So anyway. Okay, so I got some questions for you, Mark, and some of this comes from the documentary we did before, but some of these are just more in depth. So
okay,
like a lot of us, when we work on bikes, sometimes it starts off with just a fascination with our own, bikes that we had growing up. Sometimes it's frustration because it costs a lot of money sometimes to repair bikes. And so you say, you know what, I'm going to do it myself. Where did your interest really kind of come from, not just on tinkering on bikes, but in restoring them?
Oh, I'd have to say almost initially, back when I was a teenager, my dad wanted to restore an antique car, and he had bought out from the middle of a farmer's field out near, I think, Pittsburgh, Kansas, a Model A that. And he drug it back home and put it in the basement. And all summer long, my buddies and I took it apart with the hopes of someday driving this Model A in pristine condition. Project never came to fruition, but that kind of got the ball started on learning about restoration and taking things apart, researching the history and so forth. But, as a kid, and I was always into taking things apart and putting them back together, trying to make something work. I was obviously a do-it-yourself fixer-upper kind of guy, doing my own carpentry, plumbing, electrical around the house. So yeah, I was never afraid to get my hands dirty and just try to make something, either fix it and make it as good as it was, or if possible, make it better. And
yeah, awesome.
Bikes were kind of that outlet.
A lot of people, we just call it scrolling now, but they'll sit there on a binge watch and just sit there and flip through one restoration video after another of all kinds. Could be the old 1950s tin toy cars, could be old trucks that they'll probably never work on themselves, but there is really kind of a fascination and an enjoyment of watching something get restored. I think for a lot of people that watch my channel too, there's also kind of some intimidation because they feel like they'd have to have all these tools and a lot of money and a big space to work on it. So what's kind of your thoughts about taking that first leap, not necessarily at high-end restoration, but if you're going to work on your bike, does it really take a lot of high-end tools? What's kind of the first step for somebody that wants to fix up an old bike?
I have a very clear memory of first serious bike I bought. I think it was back in 2000, and I was out riding. I was trying to lose weight a whole bit. I was enjoying the heck out of riding the bike, but it got a loose bottom bracket. And I stopped at a local shop and said, hey, can you guys fix this? Well, yeah, we can put it into service, and it was springtime. It'll be done in a couple of weeks, and the minimum charge is $65. And I was just like, you got to be kidding me. No, that's just it. And the library was right across the street. I went over there and I found a bicycle repair manual. I looked to see what it took to make it that I needed to do. And I went back to that bike shop, and instead of letting them fix it, I spent this less than the same money that they would have charged me on the tools I needed to fix my own bike. And it's kind of just blossomed from there. I'm a firm believer that tools, not that you have to invest like I do, but tools never go out of style, and treated properly, they'll last you a lifetime, maybe even pass on to another generation or two. I have tools that belong to my grandfathers. So yeah, it was, I'm kind of a skinflint. So again, do it yourself stuff. I'm all about it. I hate paying somebody to do something that I could do myself. And as far as the restorations go, you start simple, and you got to be patient. It takes a certain amount of patience. It's not an afternoon thing. You just got to keep plugging away at it, chipping it at it, and going slow, because Lord only knows how many bolts I've twisted off in frustration instead of being a little more patient and going about it a better route.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. I know when we visited, you talked about probably the tool you use the most often is a hammer.
Yes.
Is that a fancy hammer or a ball peen hammer? Or what's your?
I'm in front of a live audience here. They're right there on the end.
Right here on the end.
Yeah, no, right, no, towards me, under the leather. There we go. This hammer has been around for about 15 years or better, and it's just a plain old ball peen hammer, very small. Bigger hammers get me in trouble, but yeah, for removing headsets, for just you name it, tamping dents out of the tanks in a bike. That's the most used right there.
That's awesome. I was just at my dad's house yesterday, and we have his childhood hammer from his welding days, where he welded in SE for Scott Earl on the hammer, so no one would steal it at work, I think. So
sure.
Awesome.
All of my tools have my initials on it.
Awesome. Well, we did a chance to do a documentary about a month ago with a really nice young man from Pocatello that works on lowrider bikes and fairly rudimentary tools. So mostly, crescent wrenches and adjustable wrenches all the way through. And the mechanics is maybe not necessarily finesse, but it is a lot of creative ideas about how am I going to get things to work. And surprisingly, the one thing he talked about was chain line. Like as rudimentary as some of those things are, he knows that if the chain is off by too far, it's not gonna pedal well. So I think the whole idea of being self-taught resonates with a lot of people. Yeah,
there's a lot of satisfaction from doing something yourself, and
Awesome. Just going through some comments here. So thanks for joining us from Nova Scotia. I see my friend Tyler here from Idaho Falls. Awesome. Thanks guys for being here.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, at the risk of moving on a little bit quickly here, I wanted to go ahead and talk about how you and I worked on this project recently for my friend. So I'm going to go ahead and play for you guys a short video clip from this bike that he brought back from Northern Idaho, from Coeur d'Alene. It was a bike I had never heard of before. Maybe the brand name, but I certainly never seen anything like it. And it's an old 1960s Hercules. We'll just call it a cantilever bike. So here we go. Now that we had the crank arms and bottom bracket situated, it was time to address the old brazing. From an untrained eye, this looked like a glob of melted solder that had been repainted over once or twice with black rattle can. And so I was curious to see how we'd be able to tell what the old brazing looked like compared to the new. So after gently clamping the bottom bracket of the frame in a vise, we set up a grinding disc to start the process of pulling back some of the additional brazing. The hope was to keep all the original braze that was there that needed to be, and to pull off and smooth what wasn't required. Needless to say, there was a lot of braze on this frame. Okay. So yeah, this was a bike that had been repaired at least once, maybe twice before. Not sure on that, but my dad, who's been a machinist for years and years, just in case you were worried when you saw the angle grinder, Dad's really good at taking what I call a bulldozer and still making it shovel nice and slow. But when you think about repairing bikes like this, I think of my friend who does really high end, titanium frames and steel frames, and it's just very small and nuanced things that he does here. So we did our best to try and grind things down. Dad's got much steadier hands than I do, and so we tried to simply get the frame back to a position where we could see if the brazing was going to hold. But I also knew from my friend Milton that we wanted this bike to get powder coated and get it back to a place where it looks similar maybe to what it looked like back in the 60s. And I knew Mark was up for the job. So working with one of my channel partners, bikeflights.com, they sent me a bike box that I could then send out to Mark. I know he uses them quite a bit in his own business. And so, Mark, I just want to hear about your first reaction seeing this rattle-canned old bike coming out of the box. What did you think when you saw this thing?
Well, it's pretty typical for what I get. We get a lot of bikes that have been around a long time. Frame looked intact. Did a little research on it. I believe the name of the bike is actually a Royal Imperial 6000, and I think it's kind of rare. I could only find 3 or 4 references on the internet for that particular model. But as you are aware, the bike was originally a kind of a metallic candy red. But it was, it was all there and in pretty good shape at first thought. First issue to deal with was getting the rest of the parts off. I think it came in with the bottom bracket cup that was seized and the headset. The bottom bracket proved to be a little bit of a challenge in that the tool I use, probably from the same era of VAR fixed cup removal tool, and it wouldn't work. I couldn't get the back piece in through this bottom bracket shell. And then I figured out it was because the bottom bracket shell had an oiler in it. So I had to tap out the oiler first so that I could get the tool in the backside, and got that out. Took the headset off. And
was the oiler stuck in touching the spindle then, or what got in the
No,
way for that?
it protruded down into the shell just enough so that there's a sleeve that goes in from the back side.
Okay. I know what you're talking about now. Yeah.
This guy wouldn't go into the back side of the bottom bracket.
Mm-hmm.
So once we got that oiler out of the way, this would slide in and we could clamp in it and get some leverage on it and get it out of there. I may have used some heat on that. I'm thinking about it. The headset, one of my favorites, with 52 tiny little ball bearings to chase across the floor.
Sorry about that, Mark.
Yeah. Oh, no, it's not you. It's not you. I was ready this time. I had one of those oil change buckets underneath it as I took it apart. I caught them all.
Well, I promise I was not trying to get like a free polish job out of this whole thing, but that's what you did.
But yeah, you guys had smoothed out the brass brazing. There was a void that still showed a crack in the metal.
Mm-hmm.
So I filled that in and smoothed that out. Then getting into the bike, discovered it had a bent steer tube, which kind of let me think that maybe this thing had a frontal impact. And
yeah, I'm going to pull this
Sure.
up here real quick if I can navigate through here.
By all means.
So this is the bike here done from this side. We're going to go, I'm going to actually have the frame here in the room with me, so I'll show you guys in just a second the actual completed bike. But with the slides here, this is the steer tube he's talking about right there.
Yeah, that daylight you can see behind the ruler shouldn't be there.
Mm-hmm.
So it was bent pretty close to the bottom, and that wasn't a difficult fix. Just heating up the bent area just enough to get a little glow on it, and then using my super duper cheater bar and little tugs here and there. We finally got it straightened out. The one with the blue level on it shows that it's pretty straight now, and you can see that the brass there has been smoothed out.
Exactly. Yeah. And yeah, you've got, I don't have the picture here, but you sanded down, or you media blasted board. We had sanded it down before, and then you could see this perfect little crack just beyond the braid line. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. That was the giveaway.
Okay. There we are. There it is. So yeah. And honestly, this honestly looks terrible. It's like, You wonder, how does this actually bond between it? But once this is actually on there and heats up well, so many bikes from that era were brazed, and
Oh,
they're
yes.
nice. They're beautiful.
Actually, you can probably take if you were just to want to test it, you can beat on a lot of this brazing, and the steel gives way before the brass does, surprisingly. But yeah, you
Mhm.
can see that crack there on the left-hand side, and there's a little gap in the going around. So all I did was just fill in that void and smooth it back out.
Awesome. Awesome. I think these last couple of pictures are the completed portion of it here. So here you can see, my pointer's probably not showing up, but you can see that oil port on the bottom bracket shell. And what's your thoughts on that, Mark? I used to see this on some Schwinn's and other bikes too. Did it really actually serve a purpose?
Well, it was definitely intended to, and it's always kind of puzzled me. Uh, the bottom bracket's usually filled full of grease, so maybe that's a grease zert of some sort. I'm not
Mhm.
familiar with the actual brand or the type
Yeah.
that works with, but yeah, it allowed you to service, at least lube it without taking it apart. So
I just
its
figured you need about a
intentions
cup
were
of
good.
grease.
Its intentions were good.
Yeah. Awesome. And then here's one more image here. Oh, and this is a really big thing. I actually, this was my big request of Mark, was we had what did we say this was? This is a 68 or 69
That
Sterling
one is
Archer.
stamped 59. So the bike was probably a 60. The hubs
Okay.
usually ran about a year ahead of the bike manufacturer.
Yeah. So Mark completely disassembled the entire wheel, tore this whole thing apart. And I apologize, I don't have the picture here, but there was tiny little springs where you had to sit there and order in some tiny springs to replace. Did those springs, did they hold the pawls together, or what were the springs for?
They were the ones that pushed the paws out into the ratchet teeth. And like I said, it was shifting, and I suspect it was. But on the one of the drives, it was only pulling with one paw, not the two that it should have been. So
Mhm.
kind of flirting with
Yeah.
disaster there.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, let me go ahead and pull up the bike here. Just one second.
Sure.
And my light here is not going to do it justice because it's kind of dark in this room. Let's close this off. And Mark, I'm going to close you down here, minimize you for a second.
Yeah.
Okay. So we won't hear Mark for just a second here, but I think, let's see. Nope, we'll come back to him in just a second here. Here you can see this beautiful, beautiful work. The original head badge here that Mark brought back to life. Let's see if that's in focus there. It's brass underneath with some green still in the front of it. And the only thing that was kind of unique, if this was like the original color, we had him go ahead and do these lugs in this nice matte or glossy black here, as well as on the seat clamp. So beautiful frame here. You can see that work around all the lugs. And you can still see the stamped serial number in the back of that. Okay, Mark's back here. All right. So, Mark, anything you want to say about the head badge or anything about that?
I was kind of surprised. As far as restoration techniques, that one just got soaked in some cleaner, and that took off the rattle can spray paint without removing the original paint that was there.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, just I have found sources for the small rivets that go to hold those back in.
Yeah,
Things
awesome.
like that. But, and then the only other thing we did to the frame here was that again, probably from what I believe to have been a impact accident, the rear triangle was out of alignment, and so that got all trued up for you.
Yep. There we go. A little wider right there. Okay. So yeah, if that's not in alignment, what's interesting is I grew up working in a shop that had frame alignment tools, but probably only about a third or a half of what Mark has in his shop. And I can recall the guys, because we didn't have the floor mounted version to hold and lock the frame in place. The guys would clamp one of the frames in the stand, put the big long gauge on the front, and we use strain to kind of line up to see how straight was that rear triangle with the front of the head tube there. And then they'd sit there and bend, and sometimes they'd move the whole rear triangle over at a time. and they try to bend just one part back and one part back. And so it was quite the finesse to learn how to do that. So
there's a lot of give and take. Again, just
yeah.
take some patience.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Mark, you've been very generous with your time here. We're running a little bit short, but for anyone that's joined us here, if you guys want to chime in with a question or any thoughts here before we let Mark go, I do just want to say kind of a big shout out again. If you have not seriously thought about having a bike restored, the really cool thing about Mark's website, that he gives prices for different things. And honestly, people's biggest concern about shipping something somewhere is, oh, the cost of shipping is going to make it too expensive to have the work done. And honestly, I think for the kind of quality that Mark does for his frames, it is so worth it. I know some good people here in town that do powder coating and do a good job. But if you haven't seen his video yet, you will see that the process he goes through as far as media blasting a frame, either doing a zinc coating or cleaning it up and doing a proper cleaning of the frame, is wildly better than any other typical powder coating place. So that's my take on it. Mark, do you want to say anything else about just kind of like the quality or what you're striving to do with the frames you work on?
Well, as you mentioned earlier, we started off pretty humbly, and we were contracting out sandblasting, and we were contracting out the brazing and things of that nature. And it just became obvious to us we needed to bring things in-house to control the quality, to manage our schedule better, bring things back into our control and not be at the mercy of outside vendors. So we do everything in-house, with the exception of the wet paint clear coat, and we're actually kind of looking at an alternative to the top coat now that's working out pretty well in the test stages.
That's awesome. Awesome. So again, I'll be having more bikes I'll be sending Mark's way, but if you're curious at all about prices, the great thing is they're right there on the website. You can check it out for yourself. A lot of us that are from my age are fixing up 90s mountain bikes that we, grew up with as kids. And a lot of
my
people
age are fixing up penny farthings.
Not that old, Mark. But you start to think, well, if he does classic bikes, because that's what you'll see is a lot of beautiful 1950s, 1940s, baby boomer era type bikes that are very sentimental. And we just look back and say, wow, it's so pretty, I wouldn't even ride it. So sometimes people think, well, if I go to all that expense or time or something, it'll be too nice and I won't want to ride it. And the other thing I'd say is, man, if you do a nice durable powder coat, these are meant to be ridden. You can certainly polish it up and clean it up afterwards, but what he does is such a good, durable process to keep a bike not only beautiful, but to make it rideable afterwards. So
if I may interject one last thing, you mentioned how nice they look. They're so too pretty. A lot of people want that bike. It's been in the barn for 40 years and they'd really like to display it, but the condition it's in, who'd want to see it? I love taking them back to what they looked like when they were brand new. You can look at old bikes all day long, but to see what they really look like was, that's always a treat for me.
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. Well, Mark, I do appreciate your time here. Let me close up a couple things here. I think that's everything there. So again, everyone that's joined us here from Nova Scotia to Idaho, thank you for being here, part of the channel here. We hope to do many more of these this next year. We will bring in people, Rob from Old Shovel, possibly Gary's Projects and others that have a specialty or a specific skill set that we want to share off and show with you guys. So anyone, thank you for joining us, everybody. And Mark, really appreciate your time.
Thank you for the opportunity.
All right. We'll see y'all later.